War I lasted from 1914 until 1918. In the end, much of Europe was in ruin. The Allies had triumphed and Germany had been defeated, and it was time for payback. The Allies, though America objected, presented the German government with a bill for 132 billion gold marks. That's billion with a B. It was twice Germany's annual income. Desperate, facing a bill they didn't have the money to pay, the Germans did just what America's Continental Congress did in 1777. They fired up the printing press and pumped out the paper. At the end of the war, $1 would buy roughly 4 marks. 5 years later, $1 would buy 4.2 trillion marks. That's trillion with a T. Ordinary citizens suffered the most. Germany's birth rate fell and the death rate rose. Infant mortality climbed by 21%, and on the black market, cigarettes became the new money. The government's money was so worthless, a whole wheelbarrow of it couldn't buy a loaf of bread. You might as well use it for wallpaper or for kindling. By 1930, all that crazy, out-of-control printing of money had destroyed the economy of Germany.
A key component of human life is enlightenment, the awakening from the darkness of deception into the light of truth. The so-called Great Awakening has really been going on forever, and before MAGA and QAnon, the consensus was that the banks were at the top of the criminal pyramid structure. And while many of us assumed that a hidden hand was pulling their strings as well, we realized that their main goal was a digital currency and a cashless society. It was the subject of several documentaries.
The ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one-world government run by the banking industry, run by the bankers, right? There'll be no more cash. And this is getting me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish. And all money will be in your chips. And if you're like me or you, and you're protesting what they're doing, they can just turn off your chip. And you have nothing. You can't buy food. You can't do anything. It's total control of the people.
And that chip's connected to a database that has your purchasing records, what you do, what
everything,
you sell.
Everything is in there.
And it was also commonly discussed that they'll likely use Big Pharma to get us there. But now it's as if everyone has just accepted it and found something else to fight about. Because the cashless society is being rolled out right now, and very few people seem bothered by it. In November of 2019, right before COVID, the Institute of Politics at Harvard Kennedy School had a live tabletop exercise called Digital Currency Wars, which looked at how the United States can continue to leverage economic power in a world of national digital currencies, such as the Chinese digital yuan, which is already heavily competing in trade against the US dollar and seems to be at the forefront of centralized digital currencies. And it has an expiry date. If you don't spend it by then, it becomes worthless, so people can no longer save money. The Bank of International Settlements has announced that the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations and will have technologies to enforce it. The Central Bank of Brazil is planning to launch their centralized digital currency in 2024. Israel is about to launch theirs, and the Bank of England is now preparing a UK digital currency. Italy's new Prime Minister, Meloni, is speaking out against the cashless society, but she seems to stand alone on the world stage. In the Federal Reserve's digital currency scheme, it appears that Hedera and Quant will be used on the technology side. They are already connected to everything. The cashless society is here, but everyone is talking about Hunter Biden's laptop. The tyrants are still getting exactly what they wanted. And once it's all said and done, then who will save you?
And if you're like me or you, and you're protesting what they're doing, they can just turn off your chip. And you have nothing. You can't buy food. You can't do anything.
But it doesn't matter if you are a political activist or an obedient sheep. because the banks are planning on taking all of your money to pay off their debts.
I mean, it's a little bit conflicted, right? I mean, it's important that people understand they can be bailed in, but you don't want a huge run on the institution. But they're going to be.
The FDIC currently has less than $200 billion in assets to insure over $9 trillion. That's just 1.3%. They know that a system collapse is coming, and they are already planning for bail-ins. As trust begins to fail, the people will begin to withdraw their funds, which will only guarantee a banking collapse. This is known as a bank run. In 2012, the International Monetary Fund, known for their reputation of coercion, violence, and extortion, published staff discussion notes entitled From Bailout to Bail-In: Mandatory Debt Restructuring of Systemic Financial Institutions. After the 2008 crisis, the world learned what a bailout is: trillions of taxpayer dollars printed out of thin air to pay off the bankers' bad habits. It was hugely unpopular, but pales in comparison to a bail-in. So what exactly is a bail-in? It is officially obfuscated with elaborate equations, but to put it simply, it is when the bank steals your money directly from your account. They called it haircuts when they did it in Cyprus back in 2013, which the courts later ruled was legit. And a recent video on TikTok shows that the new bail-ins may have already begun.
So I'm a Bank of America and everybody's missing money. I'm also missing money over $1,300, and they're telling me to call customer service. And they keep hanging up on people. This another person here is also missing money. So we're trying to see what's going on. Money's missing today, and we need our money. And they're already telling us to call customer service, and customer service ain't doing nothing about it. So just a heads up, if anybody's experiencing this, please let us know, because this is not right. I'm missing $1,400 from my account, and they're telling me that there's no way they can help us. This guy's missing money too. This other person is missing money too. And you missing money too? There you go. So this is not something that's just one person. This is everybody's happening to them. And this is crazy. This is very crazy. Yes, Bank of America decided to take people's money without their consent. And we're asking what's going on, and they're giving us a runaround. Everybody for the same thing, man. Same thing.
Rejecting the New World Order. The Central Bank of Nigeria launched their CBDC a little over a year ago, but the people rejected it. So early this year, the Nigerian banks emptied the ATM machines and closed their doors. This resulted in angry protests. The people attacked ATMs and blocked roads in multiple cities. The Bank of Lebanon has crashed. The Lebanese pound has fallen to an all-time low of 80,000 against the US dollar. The people have taken to the streets. Banks have been set on fire.
ولا في مي ولا في شيء نهائيا. متحللوا هن قاعدين بقصورهم ولا شايفين هالشعب، شايفيننا غنم ولاد الحرام. في منا مليونيرية بالدولار، بس ما عندهم قرش بجيبتهم، لأنه المصارف سرقت كل شيء وعم تستغل نظام الدولة الفاسد والقضاء المأمور تا يحموا هالجريمة بوضح النهار.
The majority of commercial real estate loans are lent by small banks. Massive short bets are now happening in the commercial real estate market. The Federal Reserve Bank is taking down the housing market along with all regional banks, leaving only its vassals who will be distributing CBDCs as a solution. The financial experts are now recommending that people have food, gold and silver, and cash in their possession.
It affects everybody, you know. And so I started studying in history, and I found out the same thing happened on March 3rd, 1933. Roosevelt did the exact same thing for the exact same reason, leading to the exact same result. And so studying past periods that didn't happen in my lifetime, like we haven't been through a war before, and we haven't been through a civil war, or we haven't been in the circumstances. So the three big things that are happening in our lifetimes that we have not been through before are the creation of an enormous amount of debt and printing of money to monetize the debt. That's number one. And so we'll talk about inflation and where we are in that cycle. And I'm like a mechanic. I'm not ideological. I'm just like, what are the cause-effect relationships? How does that dynamic work mechanistically? But it produces inflation. The second, but very interrelated to this, is the large internal conflicts that we are having. Populism of the left and populism of the right, and values differences that is producing a conflict, brought about also by the largest wealth gap differences, largest opportunity gap differences, and so on. That type of conflict I have never seen in my life, but that also happened in the 1930 to 45 period. And so I needed to go back and then study that over time. And then the third is the great power conflict. When 1945, when this world order began, as all world orders, there's a war, there's a dominant power. The dominant power sets the rules. And when the dominant power sets the rules, then you have a period of peace and prosperity. And so the United States in 1945 had 80% of the world's money. It had half of world GDP. It had a monopoly on the military power. And so we came into the American world order. That gap, that power gap, has shrunk to be approximately equal with the other side. And we're having a great power conflict. So you have to go back to that period of time. And I've seen that period of time happen repeatedly. When these three things happen repeatedly, it's a very dangerous set of circumstances. So we are in a position on the financial one to be in a position where you cannot raise living standards by raising money and credit. In other words, if you increase money, then the value of money is going to go down. And one man's debts are another man's assets. And so when they get negative returns by holding a debt asset, they're going to sell that debt asset, and that produces a problem, and that's over a period of time. And so the Romans, for example, put less gold into gold coins. And so you saw it in its way, and that certainly produces kind of the inflation, because you can't raise living standards by printing more money. So we have that going on. And so there's that dynamic of where is a storehold of wealth? The purpose of a currency is two purposes: a medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth. A storehold of wealth means you buy its debt and its assets, and you can save in it. And people believe that cash is a safe investment, but they're seeing that what happens is it's losing buying power, and it will lose buying power. So they start to realize it's not a safe investment. Inflation over the last year, about 8%. Interest rates were nothing. And so there was an 8% change in buying power. That kinds of changes and sort of reinforces the inflation cycle. We pay too much attention to one currency in relationship to another currency, and not enough attention to the fact that those aren't the choices. It's a choice for transactions, but it's not a choice for storehold of wealth. So if you're holding European euros and euro-denominated debt, and you're getting a negative interest rate or thereabouts, and the same is true in Japan, and you're not making up with inflation, none of those are good. And like in the 30s, they all depreciated, they all went down in relationship to goods and services and other asset prices. So what you see is all the currencies along those lines are sort of tied to each other, and they're bad storeholds of wealth, and that's why you see moves to other assets. It pays to borrow, or if not borrow, but put your money into assets that maintain buying power. So you see it happen in all the different ways. So look at whether what you're holding in the form of that cash denominated, and that'll be a debt instrument. That's how you hold a currency in order to have a storehold of wealth. Look at its real returns. The Fed understands, and central banks know, that when inflation is undesirably high and the economy is relatively strong, you put on the brakes, and that when the reverse is the case, you put on the gas. And they don't understand, I think, monetary inflation enough. What has happened is that because they put on the gas so much, have allowed interest rates to be so low, as I say in many cases, negative interest rates. And they've made liquidity so abundant that not only didn't you have to pay interest on your debt, but you didn't have to pay principal on your debt because they would have interest-only loans. And they would have low covenants, like it's easy to not meet your debt requirement. Companies borrow, individuals borrow, interest-only loans. And when there's no interest rate, basically means the stuff is free. You can buy houses, you can buy all sorts of things on that basis. And the world has adapted to that. And they did that at a very low real interest rate, a very low interest rate relative to inflation. And then they printed a lot more of that money and so on. And so inflation is going up. So mechanistically, what that means is now we have a lot more debt and we have an economy and markets, financial markets, that the pricing is structured based on those very low interest rates and that amount of liquidity. So when you go through the calculations, when I go through the calculations, and I figure a high enough level of interest rate to provide a decent real return is, for a holder of the debt, is much too high of an interest rate for the markets and the economy. But you're going to have an inflation rate that's above the interest rates, and that's not going to be desirable. So investors want to sell that. And you could see it as interest rates rise. You can see its effects on markets. You could see the effects on the capital markets. So you see the stock market going down while the bond market is going down. And that means most everything that people own practically are going down practically because most people are in stocks and bonds, that kind of thing. The Fed's trade-off is going to be very difficult. Right now, they have a very restrictive monetary policy plan. I judge that by the supply and the demand for credit. So the federal government is going to run large deficits. So that means they will have to sell debt. They'll sell treasury bills and bonds. The Federal Reserve is planning to sell $1.1 trillion of debt also. Private investors are inclined, pension funds and so on. They're losing money while there's inflation, so they're losing buying power. They're selling. And there's a selling imbalance. And that selling imbalance means, because it has to balance with the buyers, that means a contraction in private credit, which means a recession. So as I look through this, we're in a tightening phase where it's beginning to bite, but it's not really, it's barely begun because the actual rises in short rates have barely begun. It's started, the other things are rising. And that trade-off between growth and inflation is going to be very difficult. And that's why I believe that we've entered a period of stagflation, quite like the 1970s. And then we can't look at it alone. We have to look at it in light of the two other big forces. In other words, the internal conflict force. We don't have enough money, and we don't have enough real money. We have plenty of fiat money because we can print it, but you don't have enough real money. And everybody says we need to spend money on this thing and that, and I don't even disagree with that. When I look at the social conditions and the infrastructure, and I look at, okay, Ukraine, and do we need to rebuild the Ukraine? Do we need to have greater military expenditures? Do we need to have these things? But we don't ask, how much money do we have to spend? And so because of the nature of that, even just the costliness, we need to take care of the environment. But it's going to be expensive when we take care of the environment because we haven't yet fully developed the technologies that are fully cost effective in order to do that. So I think that that's the mechanical description of where we are in a political environment. So as we have inflation, that's going to be a big political thing, and it's going to cause greater polarity. There's a risk that neither side accepts losing because of the populism, and you put more financial strain and things get worse. Conditions are likely to be significantly worse, for example, in 2024 than they are now. Just take a normal economic cycle and where you are. It has the form together of what is money. I mean, it's Genesis. What is money? And how can we not only digitalize it, which makes it to some extent efficient, but also the real questions. Can it maintain value so it will not be depreciated by central banks? That's a key thing. Can it be transferred, used all around the world, accepted for purchases and sales all around the world? Then it has to do with issues like, can it be private? There's a saying in gold's case, which is, it's the only financial asset that you can own that is private and you can move around, that isn't dependent on somebody paying you money, paying you something. So as a medium of exchange. Crypto, those in a fiat world naturally becomes a alternative, a consideration. And the fact that it's gone on something like Bitcoin, I guess about 11 years, and it hasn't been hacked and it, is working in that way, has its particular appeal. It has big issues. It's not a private asset. It is easily outlawed. It doesn't constitute a high enough percentage of wealth. It's like right now, for example, Bitcoin's worth maybe $700 billion or so, which makes it a small asset by comparison to a lot of things like Microsoft is worth more than crypto is. And so it hasn't reached those particular stages. I think that people are grappling for what the new money will be in this environment. And I think we don't know yet what the new money is. I think we're going to see different countries put out their different versions of digital currencies, and then there will be private assets and gold will play a role. The important thing is we have entered an era which will carry us through the next number of years of what is the money that is widely accepted as a medium of exchange.
Tucker Carlson, tonight we are starting to get a more precise sense of what it means when Joe Biden brags about the strongest and most equitable economic recovery in modern history. What it means is it could be time to buy gold and stockpile food. Ooh, there's a deal on Russian steel case? I think I'll pick up a pallet. Just kidding, sort of. Yesterday, some of the biggest banks in this country, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, collectively lost more than $50 billion in market value in one day. That's quite a hit. On the other hand, those banks still exist, and you can't say that for Silicon Valley Bank. As of this morning, Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, has gone under completely. That makes the second biggest bank failure in the history of this country. And it's significant. SVB financed nearly half of all venture-backed healthcare and technology companies in the United States. It also apparently held significant cash reserves for some of the biggest cryptocurrencies, and it's now gone. Federal regulators have renamed it and taken it over, and that means an awful lot of people lost an awful lot of money. And no, most of that money was not insured, no matter what they tell you. The FDIC only guarantees bank deposits up to $250,000. And according to some reports, more than 90% of all deposits at SVB exceeded that. And it's unclear whether those people will ever see their money again. In fact, when customers showed up at SVB's branch in Manhattan today to get their deposits back, managers called the police. So what we have here is a 1929-style bank run, and that's not a good sign for anyone. The question is whether the people who run SVB saw it coming. The CEO, a man called Greg Becker, apparently sold more than $2 million in bank stock over the last 2 weeks. According to the site Unusual Whales, several other high-level employees of SVB, including Chief Marketing Officer Michelle Draper, Chief Operations Officer Phil Cox, General Counsel Michael Zuckert, all sold significant amounts of stock in SVB this year. Did those employees know their bank was in trouble? We don't know. And once again, where were the regulators who were supposed to prevent this? Once again, we don't know. And the business press supposed to be telling ordinary people what's happening with business? Apparently nobody noticed anything. In fact, as with the FTX crypto scam, you may recall, self-described financial experts in the media were busy promoting Silicon Valley Bank as a great investment that would last forever. The formerly great but now quite embarrassing Forbes magazine, in fact, named SVB to its list of America's best banks, not once, but 5 years in a row. And of course, inevitably you saw this coming. Here is professional BS artist / dumb person Jim Cramer of CNBC telling his viewers to buy Silicon Valley Bank, even as it was in the process of going under. This is last month.
SVB Financial, don't you want? This company's a merchant bank with a deposit base that Wall Street had been mistakenly concerned about. SVB is the old Silicon Valley Bank. Recently bought one of our favorite research firms, Moffett-Nathanson, and it's become less dependent upon private equity and venture capitalist offerings. Wait a second. Those dried up last year. They could come back. Long-term private equity and venture capital, they're not going away. Being the banker to these immense pools of capital has always been a very good business. SVB's nearly 40% rally this year is barely a drop in the bucket.
SVB is great. If that guy ever endorses anything you're doing, move to the Canary Islands. Change your name, because disaster's coming. But just like FTX, all the geniuses told you to buy SVB even when it was on the brink of total collapse. What explains that? Surely something does. We don't really know at this point. Hopefully we will someday.
Don't look now, but there's something funny going on over there at the bank, George. I've never really seen one, but that's got all the earmarks of being a run. You got any money in the bank, you better hurry.
George, let's not stop. Let's go.
A minute there. Uh-oh.
Please, let's not stop, George.
I'll be back in a minute, Mary. Well, hello, everybody. Miss Thompson, how are you? Charlie, what's the matter here? Can't you get in? What is this, Uncle Billy? A holiday?
George.
Come on in, everybody. That's right. Let's come on in. Come on, Jimmy. Now, look, why don't you all sit down? Here, there are a lot of seats over there. Just make yourself at home.
George, can I see you a minute?
Why did you call me?
I just did, but they said you left. This is a pickle, George. This is a pickle.
All right, now, what happened? How did it start?
Well, how does a thing like this ever start? All I know is the bank called our loan.
When?
About an hour ago, I handed over all our cash.
All of it?
Every cent of it, and still was less than we owed them.
Holy mackerel.
And then I got scared, George, and closed the doors.
The whole town's gone crazy.
Yeah, hello? George, it's Potter.
Hello?
George, there is a rumor around town that you've closed your doors. Is that true? Oh, well, I'm very glad to hear that. George, are you all right? Do you need any police?
Police? What for?
Well, mobs get pretty ugly sometimes, you know. George, I am going all out to help in this crisis. I have just guaranteed the bank sufficient funds to meet their needs. They will close up for a week and then reopen.
Just took over the bank.
I may lose a fortune, but I am willing to guarantee your people too. Just tell them to bring their shares over here, and I will pay 50 cents on the dollar.
Oh, you never miss a trick, do you, Potter? Well, you're gonna miss this one.
If you close your doors before 6 p.m., you will never reopen.
George, was it a nice wedding? Gosh, I wanted to be there.
Yeah. You can take this one off now. Now, just remember that this thing isn't as black as it appeared. I have some news for you, folks. I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here.
Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
And I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
Okay, Tom. All right. Here you are. You sign this. You get your money in 60 days.
60 days?
Well, now, that's what you agreed to when you bought your shares.
Tom, did you get your money?
No.
Well, I did. Old man Potter will pay 50 cents on the dollar for every share you've got.
50 cents on the dollar?
Yes, cash.
Well, what do you say?
No, Tom, you have to stick to your original agreement. Now, give us 60 days on this.
Okay,
thing.
Randall.
Are you going to Potter's?
Better to get half than nothing.
That's what I said.
Tom! Randall, now, Randall, wait a minute. Now, wait. Now, listen to me. I beg of you not to do this thing. If Potter gets a hold of this building and alone, there'll never be another decent house built in this town. He's already got charge of the bank, he's got the bus line, he got the department stores, and now he's after us. Why? Well, it's very simple, because we're cutting in on his business, that's why. And because he wants to keep you living in his slums and paying the kind of rent he decides. Joe, you had one of those Potter houses, didn't you? Well, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten what he charged you for that broken-down shack? Here, Ed, you remember last year when things weren't going so well and you couldn't make your payments? Well, you didn't lose your house, did you? You think Potter would have let you keep it? Can't you understand what's happening here? Don't you see what's happening? Potter isn't selling, Potter's buying. And why? Because we're panicky and he's not, that's why. He's picking up some bargain. Now, we can get through this thing all right. We've got to stick together, though. We've got to have faith in each other.
But my husband hasn't worked in over a year, and I need money.
How am I going to live until the bank opens?
I got doctor bills to pay. I need cash.
I can't keep margins on faith. I've got to have...
How much do you need?